This is the A-10 Warthog, and it's turning Iranian proxy maneuvers into little more than a training exercise. After a 3-year gap from major combat missions, America's toughest bird is back in action. And this time, it's not just providing cover for ground forces. It's actively taking out mobile missile teams before they can slip away. Outfitted with state-of-the-art systems, the Warthogs have now been assigned one of the toughest roles on the battlefield: eliminate launcher crews before they vanish. But what the Houthis don't realize is that this veteran aircraft still has a few tricks hidden up its fuselage. On March 29, 2025, multiple A-10s from the 124th Fighter Wing, along with 300 support personnel from the 190th Fighter Squadron, were deployed to the Middle East. This marks the most significant deployment of the A-10 in the past 3 years, and it's not just about making a symbolic appearance. Operating out of Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, these aircraft are proving essential to Navy operations against a constantly evolving threat. The Houthis have adopted what are called shoot-and-scoot tactics in an attempt to avoid detection. Here's the basic rundown. With assistance from IRGC advisors and Starlink terminals, Houthi crews receive precise targeting data. Once they're locked in, they pull camouflaged missile launchers, often hidden in caves, into firing position. These weapons are usually C-800-2S, carrying 165-kilogram armor-piercing warheads and capable of hitting targets up to 180 kilometers away. While these missiles aren't cutting-edge tech, quantity has its own quality. Fire enough of them, and some are bound to get dangerously close. But the Houthis know full well that the second they launch, U.S. retaliation will be fast and overwhelming. Maybe think Nikocado avocado on a mukbang binge. Launch from a cave, a tunnel, or a concealed ravine, and hide the launcher the moment the missile is airborne. That's exactly where the A-10 makes its presence felt. The first confirmed strike happened on April 1. The Warthogs were airborne and on station within just 18 minutes of departure. With an internal fuel capacity of 11,000 pounds, these aircraft can patrol target zones for up to 90 minutes without needing to return. And when paired with KC-135 tankers, they can keep flying as long as there's ammo left on board. And let's be clear, this beast packs a serious punch. That massive barrel jutting from the nose, it belongs to the GAU 8/A Avenger rotary cannon, which spans nearly 19 feet under the fuselage and protrudes right from the front. This 30 mm cannon spits out armor-piercing rounds at a staggering rate of 3,900 per minute. Each shell weighs nearly half a pound and features a depleted uranium tip, designed to shred through armor with ruthless precision. With this firepower, the A-10 can obliterate tanks in seconds. And when it comes to unarmored vehicles or exposed Houthi personnel operating missile launchers, the aftermath leaves little doubt. On that day, an RC-135 rivet joint circling the region intercepted chatter, indicating the Houthis were preparing for a strike. Since the U.S. had already dismantled most of their secure communication channels, Houthi commanders were now forced to coordinate using civilian cell networks, making their locations far easier to trace. The planned attack was expected within 20 minutes, so the two A-10s hit full throttle. At their top speed of roughly 420 mph, they had about 18 minutes to intercept, just barely enough time. As the jets cut across central Yemen's rugged terrain, their pilots relied on a specialized targeting system. That system is the AN/AAQ-28 Lightning Pod, used to make sure every weapon finds its mark. Mounted on either Station 2 or 10, depending on the pilot's setup, this pod is 87 inches in length and about 16 inches in diameter, weighing in at around 440 pounds. It houses high-resolution FLIR sensors, laser targeting devices, and optical cameras. Thanks to this gear, pilots can pick out human-sized figures from as far as 28 miles away. But in this operation, there would be no sniping from a distance. The Warthogs were moving in close. As their time on station approached, the pilots spotted the Houthi unit rolling a launcher out from a cave, totally unaware they were being watched. With no radar coverage left after earlier U.S. strikes, the A-10S descended low and slow. At about 6,500 meters out, they opened fire with their signature cannon, the unmistakable BRRT echoing across the desert. Each A-10 carries approximately 1,150 rounds of 30mm ammo in its internal drum, but pilots usually restrict each burst to just 1-2 seconds to conserve rounds and avoid overheating the system. In that tiny window, the aircraft can release about 260 rounds, each one the size of a baseball, traveling at 3,500 feet per second. As expected, the launcher was destroyed in seconds. But this was just the beginning of what would become a high-stakes aerial campaign by the U.S. Air Force. On April 2, an ISR satellite picked up suspicious heat signatures northeast of Sadr. Given the rarity of large trucks in that region, especially 5-ton vehicles, intelligence analysts flagged it as a likely mobile launcher and relayed the info to Air Force Command for further inspection. However, a challenge remained. While the A-10 is a formidable platform, it flies much slower and lower than modern fighter jets. Due to the nature of its 30M gun engagement, this also makes it more vulnerable to ground-based threats. To mitigate that, the pilot sits in a 1,200-pound titanium-armored tub. This heavy shielding can shrug off 23 mm rounds, and has done so repeatedly in past conflicts, like the Gulf War and Iraq. Still, the Warthog isn't invincible. Once the Houthis realized the A-10S were operating in the region, they issued a widespread alert, and any remaining radar sites began actively scanning for targets, hoping to claim a kill. But they weren't the only planes in the sky. Enter the EA-18 Growlers. At a glance, they resemble F/A-18S, and that's because they share the same airframe. However, these jets are specially modified with cutting-edge sensors and electronic warfare equipment built for one purpose: SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses. Think of SEAD like this. Would you rather go toe-to-toe with a brawler and risk a 50/50 beatdown, or blindfold him first and then land the first hit? That's the SEAD approach. The Growlers were there to blind Houthi radar systems using tools built specifically for that mission and give the A-10S the breathing room they needed to get the job done. Mounted on the Growler, this system is known as the next-generation jammer, and it plays a crucial role in clearing the airspace ahead of approaching A-10S. When Houthi radar operators activate their systems, they emit signals at specific frequencies. Since the next-gen jammers are designed to operate in the mid-band spectrum, around 2 to 6 GHz, they can easily detect radar activity pulsing within that range. This is possible because the U.S. has built an extensive mission library cataloging virtually every radar signature from hostile search, targeting, missile guidance, and tracking systems across the globe. Once the jammer detects a familiar radar signal, it instantly identifies the type of system in use and triangulates its location using geometric calculations. The pilot then unleashes an energy burst, roughly 270 kilowatts, directly at the radar's source. Normally, radars determine position by measuring how long their signals take to bounce back. But when bombarded with overwhelming electronic noise from the jammer, they can no longer detect their own returns. The jammer floods the radar with so much interference that it essentially blinds itself. While a few advanced radars have some resistance to jamming, the majority of Houthi systems rely on outdated Soviet or Iranian tech that simply can't handle the overload. Think of it like plugging a fragile device into a socket and blowing the fuse. The radar burns out from the excess signal. Within just 15 minutes, Growlers launched from the USS Eisenhower had taken out 3 of the enemy's radar stations. Now that the airspace was sanitized, the A-10s were cleared for attack. Scanning the area with their lightning pods, they identified movement on the ground. 3 launch vehicles, one of which was being hastily covered with camouflage. From a distance of 26 miles, the lead pilot launched a laser-guided AGM-65 Maverick to prevent them from escaping. Carrying a 125-pound shaped charge, the Maverick struck the first launcher dead center. The resulting explosion from the loaded warhead triggered a violent secondary blast. Nearby launchers were ripped apart by flying shrapnel, some pieces punching holes the size of fists into their frames. The remaining crew scrambled into a Toyota pickup truck to flee. But they didn't get far. One of the trailing Warthogs descended and closed in fast. Flying just below 250 knots, the pilot squeezed the trigger. A quick half-second burst from the GAU-8 Avenger unloaded 50 rounds into the truck, eliminating 4 additional operatives. By April 10, there were visible shifts in Houthi activity. Sites previously used for missile launches had gone quiet. Intelligence gathered from intercepted communications showed a marked change in tone. Local commanders had become more cautious when speaking with their Iranian contacts. Reports suggested that IRGC advisors pulled back to Sawan and began digging deeper into hardened positions. Cell phones were phased out in favor of more secure methods, buried fiber optic cables and backup antenna systems. But even that wasn't enough to escape detection. The A-10's lightning pod allows it to detect thermal signatures, meaning it doesn't have to rely solely on satellites. Once a hostile grid zone is identified, pilots can fly overhead, monitor for subtle signs like movement or heat signatures, and even pick up on the thermal bleed from underground shelters. The targeting pod on the A-10 is so advanced that its sensors can distinguish between an actual idling engine and a decoy set up to confuse it. Add the support of drone surveillance, and each Warthog transforms into a flying apex predator. The Houthis were aware of its capabilities, but they didn't anticipate how patient a Warthog pilot could be. One crew learned that lesson the hard way on April 13. Operating from Yemen's Jawf province, they rolled out a launcher armed with a C-802 missile and positioned it near an irrigation bank, waiting for GPS coordinates from their Iranian contacts. What they didn't realize was that a U.S. drone had already tracked their movements 40 minutes earlier. A nearby Warthog had been alerted and was en route. Flying low at around 3,000 feet and skimming just above the ridgelines, the pilot waited until he was within the Maverick missile's optimal release range, roughly 7 nautical miles. Each A-10 can carry 6 of these, 3 per wing. In this instance, the pilot fired 2, taking out both the launcher and its supporting radar system. As the Warthog came into view, the Houthi crew abandoned their equipment and attempted to flee. But the last thing they heard was the brrrr of the GAU-8. That was the end of it. Surprisingly, in many cases, the A-10 didn't even have to fire a shot to be effective. Here's why. The Houthis often try to conceal their launchers in densely populated areas, where direct strikes risk civilian casualties. That's where a tactic called a show of force comes into play. During a show of force, the A-10 essentially bluffs the enemy. Fully armed at base, with 6 Mavericks, a loaded 30M drum, and a targeting pod, it flies out on combat air patrol. When directed to a zone where Houthis are active among civilians, the A-10 will dive aggressively, simulating an imminent strike. Naturally, the Houthis, and anyone nearby, scatter for safety. Once the area clears, the pilot can either circle back for a real strike or pass targeting data to other aircraft. It's an unconventional method, but by the middle of April, the results spoke volumes. Houthi missile launches had fallen nearly 70% compared to early in the month. U.S. Navy vessels in the Red Sea reported far fewer enemy radar locks. In fact, some commercial tankers even resumed operations without naval escorts for the first time in 2 months. It wasn't a flashy victory, no breaking news headlines, but it was a meaningful one. Strategically, the A-10's performance has reignited the debate over close air support. While the Air Force remains committed to retiring the fleet by 2029, leaders in the Navy and Marines are requesting extended deployments, citing its effectiveness. Between April 2 and April 17, A-10S flew 218 missions with 0 U.S. losses. According to CENTCOM, they successfully destroyed 47 missile systems and eliminated 9 high-ranking Houthi commanders.